Tutankhamun's death and burial. Mysterious reasons. Stocking the tomb. Part 2. Gay Robbins has explained how the distribution of the paintings in the burial chamber of KV-62 is related to the crucial episodes of the funeral and Tutankhamun's successful passage from this world to the next. The abbreviated version of the journey to the west on the east wall plate Xiv shows only the sled bearing the mummy. Beneath a canopy, the canopic chest is absent. The traditional 9 friends towing the sled are joined by the viziers of Upper and Lower Egypt and a 12th figure whose preeminence is signaled by his costume as well as his immediate proximity to the mummy. Furthermore, like King A on the adjacent wall, he is shown with an Amana foot, suggesting perhaps an especially close relationship to the royal family. The figure is often presumed to depict Hormab, who called himself Tutankhamun's regent or deputy. The canopic chest is not the only omission from the abbreviated depiction of the cortege in Tutankhamun's tomb. No mourning women, conspicuous features of such scenes in non-royal tombs, accompany Tutankhamun to the cemetery. Probably too much importance should not be ascribed to the absence of the widow. The limited space available demanded economy that went so far as to limit royal funerary texts on the west wall of the burial chamber to the first hour of the Amjuat, which in its entirety charts the progress of the sun god's journey through the hours of darkness. The scene showing A as Tutankhamun's successor performing the opening of the mouth on the king's mummy, at the east end of the north wall follows logically on the procession, around the corner from the east wall. In the sequence of scenes in non-royal tombs, this rite takes place at the entrance of the tomb. If that was so in Tutankhamun's case, then a funerary tent could have been erected in the Valley of the Kings near KV-62's entrance, to accommodate the personnel and equipment. Bienelich proposes that the 3 animal biers and the 3 larger shrines surrounding the sarcophagus in the burial chamber were used one after the other over 3 successive nights and 4 days, of essential rites before the actual interment took place. In his scenario, the 4th, smallest shrine sheltered the mummy in the procession. The idea that the shrines saw use outside the tomb and were subsequently taken down, and then re-erected in the burial chamber makes sense, even if it cannot be proved. Like the animal biers, they preserve evidence of mishandling and careless assembly. It was perhaps after the closure of the 3rd and final coffin, when the priests had concluded the essential rituals accompanying that act and withdrawn, that the debris left over from the mummified cation of the king was deposited along with FL oral collars, animal bones, and pottery in KV-54, a pit located at some distance from KV-62. This deposit, discovered at the end of 1907, is customarily described as an embalming cache, for which there are many examples found outside the Valley of the Kings, including not only the typical little sacks of natron, balls of linen, bandages, and so forth left over from the mummified cation of Tutankhamun, but also what was long understood as the remains of a funerary banquet, along with the pottery used on that occasion and the floral garlands worn by the guests. Both the interpretation of those items as deriving from a meal and the idea that the material was once actually stored in the corridor of KV-62 have been called into question, but not that the contents were in some way connected to the burial of Tutankhamun. The priests may not have needed much time to perform the essential rituals, but the actual work of closing the coffins, one after the other, lowering the ensemble into the sarcophagus, maneuvering the pieces of the lid into place, and camouflaging the break will not have been accomplished quickly nor without incident. Simultaneously, the stocking of the treasury had to be finished before beginning the work of setting up the 4 shrines and the framework for the pole between the 4th, outermost shrine and the 3rd, around the sarcophagus in the confines of the burial chamber. The sides of each shrine, beginning with the largest, were brought in and leaned against the appropriate walls, one after the other. Then the smallest was assembled, followed by the second smallest, and so forth. A problem posed by this process was that some elements of the shrines were simply too large to pass through the opening from the antechamber into the burial chamber. The same pieces had already caused difficulties when they were brought into the tomb. A variant of the solution for this initial problem, the final 6 steps of the stairway, along with the jambs and lintel of the doorway opening into the antechamber, were cut away, was put into practice here. A chunk was simply knocked out of the northwest corner of the antechamber, large enough to admit the pieces to the burial chamber. With the shrines in place, a partition wall could be built up between the burial chamber and the antechamber, with a small opening left for the painters to exit when they were finished. Their task was made doubly difficult by the cramped quarters and poor lighting in the burial chamber, which could have contributed to the rather mediocre quality of the paintings in general and resulted in some anomalous proportions of the figures on the north wall, their larger heads in particular, which conform to neither the traditional nor the Amarna canon. Other features of the paintings that suggest a period of transition include the crimped sash, a typical accessory worn by Amarna queens, with their elaborately pleated gowns, here incongruously in combination with the simple sheath dress of the goddesses, and the Amarna foot of the god Anubis. After the painters exited the tomb, the priests could perform the very last rituals in the burial chamber. These included sealing the magic bricks in the niches cut for them. Each niche was closed with a splinter of limestone, plastered over and painted.